Hello and welcome to Journalist Hangout UK, the show where we discuss issues both African and worldwide which are affecting the continent. And we look at how these issues are seen at home and in the African diaspora. I'm Priscilla Nwikbo and I'm pleased to welcome our panel, Femi Oyeniran, campaigner and film director, Juliana Olayinka, journalist and broadcaster, and Lanre Akinola, editor of Africa Business. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a very interesting time, I must say, on the continent. However, today we're just going to have a quick look at what the Minister for Information had to say over in Nigeria.
What you must understand is that these are the dying days of Boko Haram. And what they intend to do is to embarrass government. So that's all they intend to do. Their power has gone down completely.
Juliana, I'm going to come to you first. According to the Minister for Information, there is a dying days for Boko Haram. This whole action, and his comment stems from the fact that we had 110 schoolgirls being kidnapped in Nigeria recently. And according to him, this is as a result of those who are trying to sabotage the government. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, obviously it's saddening. Anytime young children are brought into any conflict, it's awful. And of course, the nation is still reeling from 4 years ago when over 200 girls were kidnapped, many of them still yet to be found. Boko Haram, I disagree completely with Minister Lai Mohammed. Of course, you know, an election is approaching. APC are hoping to still regain their power. So, of course, they're going to say anything to kind of lift the spirits of people. But clearly, Boko Haram are a very serious terrorist organisation and one that we cannot continue to take lightly.
Lanre, you know, outside of what the Minister for Information had to say, we know that Mr. President had told Nigerians and indeed the world that Boko Haram were technically defeated. And then, you know, we're now discussing the fact that they've yet again not only bombed but kidnapped schoolgirls.
Well, it certainly doesn't look like they're defeated, and technically defeated is an interesting terminology in this case. What the reality is on the ground is difficult to say, but you know, all this is not good news for the government. It's not surprising that they're trying to play it down. This is one of the worst things that could happen because it's bring back our girls again.
Indeed. Femi, are the government really playing down the situation, or is there a real concern that, is there a real effort that has been made to tackle security issues, and most especially Boko Haram?
I think the government have tried, and the government will continue to try to pin down the issue and to control the issue. But the problem with fighting, you know, terrorism and organizations such as Boko Haram is that, you know, you've got a situation where, you know, you're fighting an ideology. And so if you go into a town, you drive them out of a town, they might have influenced people within that town to buy into their ideology. It's really difficult to fight terrorism because it's people that are committed to bringing, you know, extremism to people's lives, no matter what.
Help herself, so.
I usually agree with you, my brother, but and I get what you mean about the ideology, but you know, we've seen the atrocity that happened in Florida, for example. When the kids have gone back to school, you've seen armed guards, you know, reassuring the children that we are going to protect you and we're going to look after you. Where is the reaction to what happened in Chibok? These pockets of areas in the north of Nigeria are where Boko Haram are really their strongest. So why are these schools not being governed? If Boko Haram does translate to Western education is a sin, the government should be putting in place procedures to protect the children. Of course, they can't do that from the ideology, but they can do it to protect, you know, remote schools where kidnappings like this should happen, and it has happened.
I hear you, Lanre. I'm going to come to you because, as Juliana said, that's the standard reaction or what most people would be expecting. So it is strange to have learned that there were no security at the school for these children. We've heard the army blaming the police blaming the army, saying there was no real handover. Was the government not using the intelligence that they had? Are they not responding, reacting appropriately to such serious situations? What is going on?
Again, that's a good question. I doubt anyone has a definitive answer to that. It's a remote part of Nigeria. It's a remote part of sub-Saharan Africa. What this does is serve as a reminder of the complexity and difficulty of providing security in a region that is on many levels, far away from the control of the federal government. It's a reminder that Boko Haram is a social problem, not just a terror problem. We've seen it all around the world. All governments say the same thing. There are a few terrorists. If we go in and kill them, it'll be fine. It never, ever works that way, because this kind of violence is usually the product of social dynamics, of economic dynamics and political dynamics, and that's much more complex to solve. There's no doubt that the government of Muhammadu Buhari has made a concerted effort to try and tackle this. There's no doubt about that. But this issue is so complex and so difficult that this is, as I said, this is just a reminder that, it's going to take a lot more than photo ops and trying. Right. You're going to need much more by way of resources.
Okay. Well, indeed, we've heard the president, say recently that this is a national disaster. But let's hear him again as per what he has promised to do going further.
I have since directed all security agencies to immediately ensure that every effort is directed to ensure the safety of our schools and students, as well as bringing back the abducted girls to their families. Government remains unrelenting towards rescuing all those abducted.
Juliana, this obviously relates to your point about the schools. We've had 1,400 schools closed, 11 million children are out of school in the north. Was that sufficient, do you think?
Well, no, if your child has been kidnapped, that's not what you want to hear. You want your child back, of course. Buhari is making a concerted effort, as we've all said. And we had hoped, in 2015, when Buhari was elected, a Fulani Muslim from the north, people had thought that, this would appease Boko Haram, who were from that kind of region, but it hasn't. I don't know. I think it needs definitely more than words. Again, you can't fight the ideology, but you have to put some sort of security measures in place in that specific region, especially where there are remote schools. Because, of course, even if there was a system of alert where, girls are kidnapped, how can they get so far away and nobody see them, nobody be able to track them? There's got to be some sort of strategy in place to stop them from doing this, because, I'm sorry, Priscilla, I have to finish this point. They're also using these girls as ransom to fuel what they're doing. They're using them as money.
It's true. It's especially for young girls. But Femi, let me come to you. As Juliana said, the girls are being used for ransom. It's the whole Boko Haram thing. It's not just an ideology. It goes beyond that. Should the federal government be engaging more?
The federal government should be engaging more with people, but as Larry said, it's a social-economic issue. Because if people are disenfranchised, people are living in poverty, it's very easy to, go in there. And
but then if the ideology says, they're against Western education, how do you engage with that?
Then you protect the systems that you have in place. As Juliana said, you protect your schools, you protect that ideology, because it's not just about, education is not just a Western ideal. It's an African ideal. African parents want their children to go to school, and so I think you need to tackle them, not only their ideology, but you need to protect children as they go to school. And mobile technology is used widely in Africa. I was in New York a few years ago. They have this thing called Amber Alerts for children that are kidnapped, and it would be easy to implement something like that in Nigeria.
Very quickly, Lanre. Thank you, Femi. Very quickly, Lanre. Is education the way forward?
Quite, it has to be. It's part of the way forward. There's a long-term strategy that needs to be formulated, and there's a very short-term need to provide security. Both have to be done. It's a difficult long-term issue, and a photo op is not going to solve it. Speeches are not going to solve it.
Okay. Juliana, what's your last word on this?
Well, my last word on this is that I hope, the girls can be rescued. Dialogue definitely needs to start taking place. We need the help from international organisations. I know the Red Cross were, pivotal in helping bring back the first bunch of girls, and that needs to start taking place. And, let's just hope that this is not something that will come back to haunt Buhari, because, it's a very similar time. It happened to Goodluck Jonathan just before an election, and he lost.
And on that note, Femi, is this what is going to be the haunt, as it were, of the Buhari administration, just like we saw with the Goodluck administration?
Well, I suppose they've failed to bring back the original girls, and it'll be really difficult for them to bring back these girls if they failed in bringing back the girls from 4 years ago. So
thank you very much, Femi. And on that note, we're going to take a quick break now. We'll have plenty more to discuss, so please join us in a few moments. Hello and welcome back to Journalist Hangout UK. I'm Priscilla Wikbo and I'm pleased to welcome our panel. Femi Oyeniran, Juliana Olayinka and Lanre Akinola are still with me. We will discuss Boko Haram and insecurity in Nigeria now, first part. But insecurity is not just a problem that we see in Nigeria, it's one that runs right across Africa. And more recently, in the past 10 years, it would appear that it's getting worse. The situation in Mali is the most recent situation. Lanre, let me come to you first. How do you see this whole insecurity situation that is running right across the continent affecting, especially in the business area?
Well, it's not everywhere, but there are certainly regions that are hotspots, I guess you could call them. And this is connected to Boko Haram. So we're talking about the same part of Africa, the Sahel region, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, etc. And that's been a problem for a while. That's where a lot of these militant groups have their base. Al-Qaeda in Islamic Maghreb, which traces its roots back to Algeria, has been operating in that region for quite a while. It's a very well-established hub for the South American cocaine trade into Europe now, which comes through West Africa. And it's an impossible to govern and impossible to to police territory. You're talking about open desert. You're talking about huge countries. You're talking about a region that's 2-3 times the size of Western Europe. Good luck policing that. And that's why we're seeing things like this new G5 Sahel force being set up. There was a conference just last week where donors pledged $500 million. It's being championed by Emmanuel Macron out of France, and that's an attempt to finally try and get a grip on that part of Africa. And it's about time, because it's been causing trouble for a lot of people, not least poor schoolgirls in Nigeria.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, Lanre. But I hear what you're saying. Landmass is huge. It's impossible. Can we really say it's impossible, or is it that Africa hasn't really sat down to table the problem effectively in order to be able to man it, as it were?
It seems impossible, and that's because the issues surrounding security are not just somebody's done something on a train in London and you need to tackle that problem. It's so deep. We're talking about impoverished nations, corrupt governments, regimes that are involved hand in hand with terrorist cells. You've got a new wave of insurgents coming from the Middle East who are, who've been fighting there for years. They're losing a battle. They're coming back. So there are so many different issues that are tackling Africa at the moment. And I think, they need to focus on those issues before they can start talking about security, because this is where the insecurity comes from.
But really, we can't ignore security.
And they don't know, sorry, Femi, but also the reason why I say that is because, when there are conflicts in the Gambia or in Libya or certain areas, African nations are able to go in, come amongst themselves and sort them
Nigeria.
Out. Exactly.
Okay.
So we can do it,
so
but there are lots of issues.
But then the question is this. What is the African Union doing? Because really, they should be leading this insecurity situation and making sure that a solution is preferred, at least from the centre.
But the African Union is underfunded, as and so there's only so much the African Union could do. And so at the end of the day, you look at, individual states, you look at Nigeria, they're struggling to bring back schoolgirls. but Nigeria is one of the, like, you know, strongest military forces in that region. And so you just look at, you know, it's difficult to commit more funding to the military when you haven't got infrastructure right, you haven't got education right, people are still living in poverty, and so they're more immediate.
So is it then a question of priority? Because it is not to say that if funding was prioritized, I mean, why should France, for instance, be leading in the way forward for tackling insecurity?
Because France,
when you have 52 African countries.
Yeah, because most of the European countries are the countries that created the insecurities in the first place. It's historical.
So then, if they created the insecurity, why then do we think that France leading it is then going to?
I mean, they're going to have to lead it because if the African nations try to lead it, they're not in the G5. They're not, involved.
You don't need to be in the G5.
But they're not involved in these conversations with the countries that have all enough money to support and military power to support them. And also at the same time, you look at the fact that until it starts affecting the West, i.e. through the drugs trade, the West does not take action. And like I said, African nations within themselves do not have enough money to spend all their money on security.
I don't think it's a money problem. I think it's a priority issue probably. But, Lanre, we also have the situation where these groups are used by, politicians in different African countries, indeed around the world. Surely the beginning, as it were, or the action should begin with them in order to be able to tackle this. They would have the answers, would they not?
Who would have the answer?
The politicians that use these different groups or that set up these different groups, the militia groups that rises up.
No doubt that's part of it. But I want to pick up on this point around the West causing a lot of this. That's an important factor here because a lot of the insecurity, especially over the last 7 to 8 years, is a result of the quote-unquote intervention in Libya.
Yeah. But then they don't cause it in isolation.
And to this point of Africans being able to maintain security, Muammar Gaddafi was not a pleasant man, but he had a grip on security in North Africa and the Sahel. And there, most definitely, that intervention has contributed to this. So I would say that there's a responsibility on the part of Europe.
And it's been abandoned.
to do something here. Their motives, I would certainly question, but they better do something because they have a big role to play.
I understand what you're saying, but you can't just leave it to them because
it's not about leaving it to them.
After all, it is the African continent, is it not? Who does it affect the most? But Juliana, I want to come to you because, should Africa be looking more to her diasporans to be able to tackle these issues? Because we know that a lot of African diasporans also work within the security industry in all of these countries, and they come up, as it were, with sometimes some of the solution to dealing with, insecurity within the Western countries. So should the African diasporan be more focused and be doing more? What role can they play?
No, I totally disagree with that. I don't know if I'm coming off the Black Panther hype, but, there's the Wakanda kind of sentiment here. You can do everything on that continent. But I must say, it does start with the individual, because if we look at security, it's not just terrorist cells. It's whether you're in traffic on the mainland in, Nigeria and you're scared that somebody's going to break into your car. I think security does start with the individual. It should be a community-led effort. You start with who you are, looking out for your neighbour. There's no point living in really big houses with, really big gates and you don't care about what's going on with your neighbour or the person on the street.
But you can't do that in isolation.
No, that's what I mean. So it starts, I think it's down to the individual and you're looking out for your neighbour. I think that it's peer-to-peer, it's community-led, and I think sometimes Africans, especially those who have more and those who are very wealthy, tend to kind of lock themselves up and don't care about what's going on around them, and that's where we lead to, small troubles that grow.
So the African diaspora can't assist,
do you agree African diaspora can, I don't can assist, but what you see is, people work out of self-interest at the end of the day. And if I've created a piece of technology or, security systems that I can sell to the West for more, I'm going to sell it for more. We go
I hear what you're saying, but in Somalia, for instance, they are insistent because at the moment they've got a number of Somalian diasporans who hold positions as ministers, and now they are calling on and wanting to be able to have more of African diasporans, you know, or have more of their diasporan counterparts to do more.
Being in the diaspora has nothing to do with security. I don't understand it.
For me, the
to
problem,
bring their expertise, to contribute.
There are enough experts in Nigeria. There's enough money in Nigeria.
I think it's patronising.
Yes.
Personally, I think it's patronising, and I think there's what you have is a free flow of you know, intelligence and technology and knowledge of people going back and forth. People going back and forth anyway, and also, like, you know, if you look at government and the way that, like, you know, I'm Nigerian, so I know more about Nigeria. You look at government, the way Nigerian government is done, it's the same people that have been leading the country since the 70s and the 80s. And so, you know, there isn't room for diaspora as such within that system.
Right. Interesting. Lanre, very quickly,
Yeah.
I heard you there agreeing passionately with what Femi was saying. There's no room for diasporans?
It's not about no room. I'm not sure what the role is, but I'd like to make a couple of quick comments. First, there's this Sahel force is being, a lot of the funding is coming out of the Middle East, actually. Turkey, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, etc. It's not just France. Another thing is this is ultimately a question of development, socioeconomic development. And third, we haven't even mentioned this, a big factor in this is climate change. That's huge in driving insecurity, and we haven't even touched on it, but we don't have time.
Okay, unfortunately, we're out of time. But don't forget to follow us at RealJHUK on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I'm Priscilla Wikbo, and from the entire team here in London, goodbye, and thank you for watching Journalist Hangout UK.